The Golden Robe, written and read by Julian Brown. The Golden Robe, Part 5, Heaven or Hell. From as far back as Sedgwick could remember, he'd been accused by many of being a helpless daydreamer, ever since the days when his mother would ask him to quickly run to the shop to buy some milk, and he'd return many hours later with fanciful tales that no one believed, involving glowing shapes moving amongst the bushes and strange little dancing people singing and reading poetry to him. He seemed to be a lad caught between two worlds, this one and a far more interesting one elsewhere. The same thing would happen at school, with Sedgwick often being humiliated in front of the whole class, unable to prove he was paying attention. Of course, it wasn't long after the detentions, scoldings, groundings, and various punishments failed to correct his wayward behaviour that he was put on a daily regimen of powerful psychotropic medications, everything from olanzapine to risperidone, Ritalin to Prozac. The combined effect of this chemical cocktail over time seemed only to push Sedgwick even further away from those trying to reach him and deeper into the alternate void he inhabited. His life had been a catalogue of missed opportunities, never really being present enough to cut the grade. Most people were fast to label and diagnose him for all his perceived flaws, but very few spent any real time trying to understand him. Not much had changed for Sedgwick now as an adult. He continued to be here, and yet somewhere else. He continued to do as he thought he should be doing as dictated by the world around him. He didn't enjoy much of it, but at least it kept his mother and the rest of the family off his back. The fact that he had acquired a normal job and was at long last living a normal life was enough to ease the conscience of those who felt somewhat responsible for him, even if he wasn't particularly happy. In his mother's eyes, this was a good thing. It wasn't normal to be particularly happy in this day and age. What with killer viruses escaping from biolabs, cost of living crisis, and World War III kicking off in Eastern Europe, better to live a meaningful life than a happy one. Sedgwick felt his life was neither meaningful nor happy though, and so when he stumbled upon the Golden Robe and had the good sense to try it on and make a wish, and was instantly whisked away to this dimension of magic and wonder, he found he had achieved both in one deft stroke. Where was he? He wasn't sure. It was a village by the coast, very much like where he'd grown up, but nicer. People here treated him with respect and kindness, and had no desire to judge or condemn him. In fact, people here only had time for real things like love and fun, smiles, and being helpful. No one tried to fix Sedgwick. They appreciated him just as he was. He made some new friends here who helped him to build his house by the beach. Sedgwick felt like he was starting all over again, beginning anew. It was as if all his past sins had been washed away. It was a victorious journey of rediscovery, building his new house with his new entourage and then decorating the place and making it home. He enjoyed every part of it, from putting up scaffolding to sanding down walls and laying down the carpet and laminate flooring, each step like a masterstroke of the brush on the canvas, painting the picture of his new life. One moment of fulfillment seemed only to flow into another, when soon after his home was completed, he met the love of his life, Nancy. She was a beauty inside and out, like he had never known before. She loved Sedgwick, and he loved her. Together, they raised a large family in that lovely house by the beach, and lived an idyllic life only read about in books. Sedgwick would rise early and sit on the balcony wondering where his old life went, looking out over the sea, seeing enormous winged beings of light dancing above the waves, hundreds of them, moving in unison like starlings, with no clear leader, and yet all being led towards some higher, greater truth in a harmony of all. Some other people here saw the same visions. Even those who weren't able to see the little dancing people or the glowing shapes did not chastise Sedgwick for his perception. No, on the contrary, he was seen as a unique soul and treated as very special because of his gift of sight. He did not have an answer to the many questions he had. Was this the same Earth, or was this another reality, a parallel universe? Was there another Sedgwick in that old life that he'd left behind, still depressed, still floating aimlessly through life from one job to another? Was he merely one version of Sedgwick copied and pasted here? Or was there only one Sedgwick, ripped from that time and space and reconstituted here in this coastal utopia? Though he could not explain the anomaly, he felt no anxiety. For scientists with all their intellect still could not explain the great mysteries of existence, from everything from the growth of an acorn into a great oak, to the orbits of moons around planets and planets around suns. They could give you a lot of numbers and formulas, but couldn't answer the most basic question. Why? Meanwhile, Leopold found himself in great distress, held down on the ground and helpless. This would normally be the stuff of his wildest dreams, as he would usually be in the power position, in control of the fantasy. Here, he was taken against his will by rotting corpses, some female, some male, bleeding all over him as they satisfied their lustful urges. Every time his body was manipulated to perform, he would see a flash image in his mind of his attacker's past, prior to this invasion of his intimate parts. He saw women and men gang raped by soldiers among the abandoned ruins of bombed apartment blocks. Husbands shot or beaten to death in front of their wives. Inevitably, the traumatized woman who witnessed this would offer much less resistance, if any at all, to the unwanted advances of these uniformed devils. It was as if humankind, even in what seemed like a sophistication of culture and advancement, was only ever a few breaths away from utter savagery. The primal, predatory animal instinct lurking just under the thin veil of civility. Drop a few bombs, and it had the effect of blowing this door clean off its hinges to release all the dormant, repressed demons hidden in everyday folk. These were the inevitable perversions that came with war. In this chaos, many good people became corrupt. Unless a person practiced a true dedication to higher principles of living, the moral compass went haywire and could no longer point true north. Leopold could not feel remorse. It was not the way he was built, and so for the sake of balance to which the universe is ultimately committed, it had to find another way to make him aware of the extremity of what he had done. He knew that every corpse that took advantage of him was previously someone who had themselves been ravaged by the evils of the war he started. These recurring dreams were breaking him. He had never felt so dysfunctional. Something meant to be propping him up from the inside of himself had completely collapsed, like the infrastructure of a war-torn nation. The dreams had become life. His consciousness consisted of nothing else. His waking life had no taste, no colour. Intensity came back as soon as he shut his eyes and saw and felt for himself the pain and agony, the suffering he had caused to millions of people. How could one man alone bear such torment? It was too much to endure. Most of Leopold's waking day was now spent heavily tranquilized into an almost comatose state. Ketamine was the only thing that seemed to settle him and switch his mind off so that he could at least have some time away from the haunting, vengeful mob in his mind. Just as it was necessary to breathe and to eat, it was necessary to sleep and unavoidable. Leopold could resist, but at some point he would have to close his eyes. And once again, all that persecuted him would return to him vividly from inside his own heart. One night, as he was staring up at the ceiling, fighting the pull of sleep, he saw in his mind's eye a vision of Laura, the pretty-faced volunteer. She was smoking a cigarette on a distant stretch of the lawn with a secretive air about her, as if she was hiding. Laura seemed to be in deep thought. It had been ages since he'd last seen her, since he'd last gone to weekly group therapy sessions. Ever since meeting Laura, Leopold had regressed into such a debilitated, awful state with his persistent manic tantrums that Dr. Mallowan, the authority at the Grove, decided to isolate him from the main population of the hospital for the safety of staff and the other patients. In all of this commotion, he had forgotten about Laura, and remembering her now, wanted so much to see her and speak with her again. Just then, the whole building shook violently. An incredibly piercing sound popped Leopold's ears, reducing everything to silence around him. Then he found himself on the lawn of the Grove, which was no longer the lush green of grass and hedges, but marshes of mud and broken pavement slabs, swimming in pools of blood. He looked up and saw the mob returning, coming for him from every direction, all calling out his name. There was nowhere to run to or hide, the bombed-out main building behind him now in ruins. Leopold grabbed fistfuls of mud, earth, cement, anything he could get his hands on, throwing it at the approaching half-dead army. Then he heard the clanging of a bell, the discordant frequency of the sound vibrating through his body and making him panic even more. At that moment, Dr. Mallowan entered Leopold's room and witnessed him hyperventilating, screaming in terror and throwing his own feces at the walls around him. How long had he been doing this? The inside of his room looked like that of an Irishman on a hunger strike at the infamous H Block during the Troubles. Dr. Mallowan shook his head in disbelief. It was worse for Leopold than he first thought. He instructed 7 fairly well-built men in nursing attire to restrain Leopold. After some effort, they were able to overpower and sedate him with a needle in his back, bringing an end to his latest manic episode. Laura sat on a bench at the end of the lawns of the Grove, sneaking a cigarette before the group started. She thought of Leopold and the golden robe. She'd asked a friend who was interested in the occult if he knew anything about it. Surprisingly, he was more than just a "please subscribe to my channel" YouTuber, and had actually done some research, and so was able to give her some of his insights on the matter. She wanted to question Leopold specifically about the golden robe, but he had been far out of her reach for some time now. When Dr. Mallowan told her that Leopold's condition had worsened so much they had to separate and sedate him and put him in a kind of solitary confinement, she felt annoyed at herself for honestly caring little for his welfare, only so far as it could furnish her with the information she needed. Did Leopold know what happened to Sedgwick? Where was Sedgwick? Where was the golden robe? Laura would demand that Dr. Mallowan allow her to see Leopold today, even if just for a few minutes. It would be good for him to see a friendly face, she would say. It might even help his recovery. She would put her foot down with the doctor, for he was known to be stubborn. Laura had been coming to the Grove now for half a year consistently every week to volunteer in the sessions, so she felt she had earned the right to be heard.